Welcome back to Mental Breakdown. I'm Maier. Today, we are talking about how our brains are built. For a long time, the world has looked at the differences in how we think, learn, and process as things that need to be fixed. But we're shifting the narrative today as we dive into neurodiversity, whether it's ADHD, autism, dyslexia, or any of the many ways that our wiring can vary. Neurodiversity is about recognizing that there isn't just one right way for human beings to function. I'm joined today by Darcy Easley and Chantal Laing, and we're going to walk through what neurodiversity actually is, and just as importantly, what it isn't, the process of the assessment, how we move from I think I'm different to now I understand why, effective treatment and support that honors who you are rather than trying to change you, and practical tips for clients and their loved ones to build a life that actually fits their unique brain. It's time to stop fitting a square peg into round holes. Let's get into this breakdown.
So I figured we could talk about all things neurodiversity today, since Darcy, you are the neurodiverse expert of our whole entire practice. Like, if you were to describe it to somebody who had nothing, like knew nothing about neurodiversity, how would you describe it?
Easiest way I explain it is that it just means that your brain processes information in a different way than like what a neurotypical person's brain does. And so that's essentially kind of what it is, like at its like base level. And then it's different depending on like what diagnosis you have or how you experience your symptoms. That depends on like how you process the information, how you receive it, like how you interact with people. But ultimately it's just a different way of thinking and the way that your brain processes information.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds really simple, can be very complex.
But that sounds like everybody. Like, I feel like everybody's neurodiverse. Maybe
Mhm.
that's an inaccurate statement, but I will stand by that.
I don't think it's inaccurate. I think in some ways everybody has a little bit. And I think like I think that it's one of those things I think that we will probably see shift like autism did. Like when we used to have just like the specific diagnoses and had like Asperger's and things like that. My gut tells me like that the next time they do another DSM, there will
Yeah.
be some kind of like neurodiversity spectrum, which is like what they changed the autism diagnosis to and put it on a spectrum and
Mhm.
added the levels, because that's how I think neurodiversity functions too, is like it's just wide range. And so
Yeah.
that's what my gut tells me, but you know, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, and I think the same thing. And Darcy, you and I have been through a couple DSM updates, so because we've been doing therapy forever. Chantal, I'm curious for you, did they talk about neurodiversity in school, like in any part of like abnormal psych, pharmacology, anything like that?
They did, and we
Okay.
actually had a guest speaker come in, which was really cool, who kind of like you, Darcy, like, specializes in this space
Oh, was it
specifically.
Casey?
Yeah,
Yeah, she's so good.
yeah,
Mhm.
she's so good, and I think she presented the information in a way that was just very normalizing of, like, I think now we're kind of getting up to speed on people's experiences that have maybe gone, like, undiagnosed or unnamed for a long time, and I think the big one for me, which Darcy, I'd, like, love to hear your thoughts in working with this age range, is, like, the difference in neurodiversity when it comes to teenage girls versus teenage
Mhm.
boys and how there are some ways to be aware of, maybe what to be aware of or look out for too.
I think like that shift into females who are neurodiverse, I don't think really happened for me until I like shifted into private practice. Like always have had the kids on the spectrum and things like that, but like something kind of shifted. I think for me like 3 or 4 years ago, when I was like, these females present very, very differently. And then there's just not a ton of research on females, which is why I feel like they go so underdiagnosed in general. But it's always interesting to me because like I will sit and especially when I'm sitting with a lot of like my teenage girls, and they will tell you like they don't experience like ADHD maybe in a traditional way, but like when we talk about like how they feel things and like how they are navigating like their social relationships and things like that, that's when I see like their ADHD. And so some of them are really surprised because they're like, that's that's a part of my ADHD. And I'm like, yes, I tend to think that like females that are ADHD feel way deeper than most females. And they tend to be hard on themselves because they're like, why am I so emotional? Like, this isn't normal. Uh, so typically when I hear things like that, I'm like, okay, that's a marker for me. Like, I need to pay attention to other things going on because I don't think like that's a symptom that I feel like is talked about a ton. You're just like, oh, she's a dramatic teenage girl. And I'm just like, I don't think that that's what, what it is to come out because like, well, we talk about like girls tend to internalize and boys, you'll like the acting out. So like when I have ADHD boys, like you see behaviors, right? Females, you see them internalize and you see it a lot come out in their relationships. Like, I would venture to say that almost all of my teenage girls that I see that are neurodiverse in some way, like, struggle with their peers, like, significantly. And not because, like, they can't socialize or things like that, but I think, like, little things that shift in their friendships are way more significant than, like, somebody who's neurotypical. They'd be like, you're fine, like, whatever, you're mad today, we'll be fine tomorrow. Like my ADHD females, they're like, my friendship's over, my life is over, like I can't go back to school. And I'm like, well, what happened? And they're like, she looked at me funny. And I'm like, oh, okay. But that's how it feels for them. So that's a big one.
Yeah. One thing that stood out to me, well, and this isn't going off of Chantal's question, but kind of going off of what you just said, Darcy, of anytime there's a neurodiversity, there is already that negative belief that is instilled in a client or a person where it's like, because they know that they're different than their neurotypical peers. And so when somebody looks at them funny, it like hits that negative belief of like, there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I'm different. I'm weird. I'm whatever. And so that's, I think, going off of what you said, where then they feel that so deeply that it's hard to like bounce back and recover from that because it's like, see, even they think that.
And I think girls, one of the things that I think we've learned is really common with females is that because it's hard for me, I always say it's just because women are superior, but
We are.
because I say like women mature like at a higher rate than boys and things like that, we're always paying attention to social situations, which is why females, I think, go underdiagnosed too. And so, like, we just adapt. Like, we figure out what social situations are going on, and we're like, that's how they're behaving. So I need to behave like that. Boys don't do that. Boys are like, I don't care what they're doing. Like, I'm going to do what I want. And so that's another reason why we're so good at masking and like adapting that like you may not see any of those signs or symptoms until like all our coping skills have broken down and you're like where those behaviors come from? But that has a lot to do with it too, that we just mature faster and pay attention more than they do.
Yeah. Well, and we're conditioned to do that, be polite, be good, be kind, like, yeah, all of that stuff. Which I wish people would train boys to do that or condition boys to do that more.
I mean, I agree. Like I teach them all the time, chivalry is not dead. And so if you're not going to learn it anywhere else, you're going to learn it with me.
That needs to be a group that you do in the new year, Darcy. Like that needs to be like a teen boys group, a chivalry group.
We used to do it like when I have the boys group, like anytime we were doing sex ed, like that was always the extra component. So I was like, you guys need to have this education, but I was like, none of this education matters if you can't like get into a relationship and maintain a relationship. And I was like, and that's not going to happen if you're like, take me to McDonald's and I'm not going to hold the door about that. And then like, even in like that's one of the things too that we do in like what I do with a lot of my kids that are on the spectrum is like we role play those kind of things. And nobody knew that. Like, how are you going to hold the door? Like, how do you hold the door? Like, we have to get very specific and practice it a lot, but those are the fun times too. Because you have to like, even something simple as like, if I have a boy, he like opens the door and walks through it and then holds it like this way so she can come behind. I'm like, no, we don't do that. But I held the door. So we talk about like, we have to talk about all those little nuances.
Yeah. I think that needs to be a group in the new year.
So fun.
And we can have different age groups, like for teen boys, like baby adults, like the maybe 18 to like 23. And then, Yeah.
We need to do some for some adult males too.
Yeah, we do. So, okay, so that brings me to how can you distinguish an adult men spectrum, like neurodiversity behaviors versus like a mood disorder versus like personality disorder? Because I'm just thinking like for adult men, if they don't have the social awareness and sometimes what they're saying is coming out maybe more aggressive or very rigid, very fixated, like how do you distinguish like what diagnosis they would get from neurodiversity to maybe like something else?
I think like that's one of the things that we talk about a lot when we're talking about trauma too, which is we have to pay attention to all of these things that can look the same. And so when I do neurodiversity trainings, one of the things that I love to use is Venn diagrams where they show like the overlapping symptoms. And so when I'm seeing things, like I feel like if I don't know immediately and I'm like, is that or could it be something else? I have to spend a lot of time, I think, digging. Like, is there a trauma history? Like, when did these symptoms start? Like, are these like only happening in one area of your life? So things like that. Like, I have to pay attention to all of those little areas. And then I think that that helps me kind of get to a diagnosis. I think it's can be more difficult, I think, in men because like if I have a female, like she's gonna come in and tell me everything that she's feeling. And guys don't tend to start there. And so I tend to kind of focus on like behaviors and like what your interactions are and like what life is like at school or at work and in those relationships. And then that can kind of help give me a gauge. It's always best. Like if I have like a couple, like I have found like if I have couples and I think one might be neurodiverse, like when I bring it up, typically the other person is like, oh my gosh, thank you. I've always thought that. Right. That
Yeah.
always happens. Like I've never said it and a person be like, oh, I never considered that. It always happens.
Yeah.
So having those insights,
Yeah.
right, is really helpful. And having like parent information and teacher information is really helpful because like I think like when I think about kids that are on the spectrum a lot, like I have a kiddo right now who is the most well behaved, beautiful child at school. And they would be like, we couldn't even tell you that he's on the spectrum. And then as soon as he goes home and he gets to take off his mask, like he is like mess. And so that's why, like, I think it's so important to get information from multiple places because if I only focused on his behavior at school, I'd be like, they don't see anything, like nothing's going on. So we have to consider all areas of their life.
Yeah.
Because usually you see it fluctuate. Usually you see deficits in one or more areas because people tend to excel in some things, and that's okay, and that's great. But I have to know all of it and know the whole picture.
Well, and you just described my youngest child who, if you saw him at school, you'd be like, oh my gosh, he's perfect. He's such a good student. Then he comes home and it's, the grumpiness, I'm tired, like teenage attitude, which are all developmentally appropriate, but like totally different kid from school to home. Or even like when he came out to like our holiday dinner, like he was on like best behavior and then, comes home and it's like, oh, the mask is off. So I get all of him. So yeah.
I think he's an angel. So I mean, what he's talking about. But
Not when he hit you with that air hockey puck.
that's true. He did. That's true. That could have been a part of his impulsivity.
Maybe. Or he's like, fuck Darcy, I'm going to take her out.
Yeah, it just works in my benefit because now I get all the amazing ducks.
Yep.
So there we go. For me.
Right. So what falls under neurodiverse? What are some common diagnoses that you guys see? Because I see a lot of like ADHD, trauma, depression, anxiety. That's typically the clients that I get just because that's more of like what I specialize in, but I'm curious what you guys get.
Chantal, what do you see?
I feel like a lot of ADHD. And just thinking about like my client load right now, Darcy, what you said about like women specifically and how that can kind of come in and their internalization of emotions and things. I can think of like a couple right now that, I think present that way. So I think ADHD is probably the biggest one, and then the non-trauma as well.
I like how you said Manon trauma, like I'm causing all the trauma. I was like, wow.
Like you said,
That's just for my staff, you guys. I'm just kidding. But yes, we do a lot of trauma work because that's like what our practice specializes in. So, because I love doing trauma work, so I make everybody else love doing trauma work. Maybe that's the Manon trauma.
There we go. That's what it is. She calls it encouragement. Yeah, I think we see those. Autism. And then I think like the ones that like people I think we don't talk about a ton just because I think it's coming out way more now. Just like I think the conversations about autism and ADHD are way more prevalent now. But when we're talking about like OCD,
Oh, yeah.
which is like when you can see OCD, I think a lot in conjunction with a lot of these other diagnoses. And then like you will see like Tourette's, like learning disabilities, like dyslexia.
Oh, also my
There's
16-year-old.
yeah, there's all kinds of things that fall underneath that umbrella that I think people don't necessarily know are like neurodiverse.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because I'm going back because I did one of Casey's trainings. It was like working with like neurodiversity and like couples and families. And then it was Patty's like ethical training afterwards. And I remember texting Darcy and I'm like, Darcy, I just learned about hyperfocused ADHD. Is this me? And she's like, you're just learning that you have ADHD in that way. And I'm like, I didn't know that that was a thing. Yeah.
It's like those things that we don't think about, right? And
It's so
like
normal.
because I think we just have learned to function. Like, we're just like, that's what works for me, and this is what I have to do. And if I don't do it, like, things go left. And so, like, I think that that's obviously what happens. Like, I was a late diagnosed ADHD person.
Right.
I mean, I think it's one of those things like you all, like, I was like, I always kind of know, but I was just like, it's just something like I just figured out. I was like, I just have to manage. But then I feel like I got to a point where I was like, I can't manage it as
Yeah.
well as I used to. And so that's when I was like, okay, it's time to like get some help because I'm not managing it the way that I used to be able to. So, and I wanted to ask you guys, like, do you feel like, I want to say the state of the world, but do you feel like the way that we live now as compared to like Chantal, you're a baby, as opposed to like the way that maybe Manon and I grew up,
Mm-hmm.
uh, contributes to
For
like
sure.
people having like ADHD because I was like, we didn't have devices. We didn't have like instant gratification and information always right there. And I just feel like there's a lot that goes on and a lot that has changed in our world in general that
For sure.
contribute to all of this.
Like you said, it's that instant access, instant
Mhm.
gratification. And I feel like because Darcy, like we didn't grow up on screens. I mean, yes, there might have been a TV, but it's like there were commercials. So, I
Yep.
remember timing like my bathroom break and my snack were on perfectly for like the 2.5 minutes that the commercials would
Mhm.
be. Where now it's like if there's an ad, my kids are like, what is this? And I'm like, you would not have survived in like the 80s at all. Can't we just pay to make it go away? And I'm like, my gosh, like, so there is
Mhm.
like, there's less, I think, of like, I don't want to say patience, but like, they're less patient with things that I think we were forced to grow up with. Or
Mhm.
even like, if like the Wi Fi is down, it's like, we didn't even have internet for a lot of like, or at least part of my childhood.
Yeah.
So I know I'm totally dating myself right now as we're having this
Okay.
conversation.
Okay, dating myself. Like when I think about it and when I talk to kids today, I am really grateful that I grew up without all of that
Yeah.
because I mean, and then just all the other, I think, contributing factors because I think a lot of that, especially what I see with a lot of my females that are ADHD because they feel so deeply, that also contributes to how they feel about themselves. And so we're dealing with all of
Yeah.
this self worth stuff because they're so concerned with what they're putting out there and who's seeing it and who's commenting on it and
Yeah.
things like that. And so I was like, I tell them all the time, I feel very blessed and lucky that like I got to go to school every day and nobody was taking a picture of me and posting it on the internet for everybody to see. I just
Yeah.
got to go and do whatever. And I got to make my mistakes without it being on Snapchat. And they don't get to do that. Well, they do. They just don't get,
They choose
and
not
that's
to.
yeah. And so I feel like so much of that contributes to the difficulty in getting them to a place where they can manage those symptoms because it's real easy for me to sit in my chair and be like, take a break from social media, right?
Yeah.
Like the horror that comes across their faces when they're like, what? Is that's their connection, and so it's really difficult because I think it is a really big contributing factor as to like
Yeah.
why a lot of these females feel the way that they feel and then struggle because like then you're having these moments where you're struggling with how you're feeling about yourself and then I can't focus and then I can't do school and
Yeah.
it's shit. this spiral.
Well, and seeing like what you're left out of instantly. So it's like, when we were in high school, granted, there were like pagers and cell phones, but there wasn't like social media. So it's like you had no idea if you weren't invited to like the popular
Yep.
kids like party after or whatever. You just didn't know about it. Or if you did, you'd find out like weeks later because you heard somebody talking about it. So,
Yes.
yeah, for sure. And I think for the females, like you said, it does hit them so deeply where it's like, I thought we were friends. Why aren't I invited? So,
Yes. Gosh,
Yeah.
I'm missing my beeper.
right?
Mom used to page you, and he's like, I have to get to a payphone. I said that to a kid one day. They're like, what's a payphone?
My gosh.
It's concerning.
I go, and then they were like, oh, I saw one in a hotel lobby once. I was like, oh.
I do miss my old flip phone because that thing would last like a week without having to charge it. Like that was great. Like,
Oh, that's
I
nice.
miss,
It's crazy. Like I was watching, sorry, people, like I like Real Housewives, not as much as I used to because it's a little toxic, but like they were showing old episodes, and I think there was like the first like season of Jersey, and they had flip phones, and I was like, I can't believe this show's been on this long, and I can't believe like it's been forever. I was like, it was so weird to like watch a television show with people using flip phones. I was like,
mhm.
wow.
I miss,
Yeah.
But those phones, like that's the other thing too. I think a big marker for ADHD and anxiety is like doom scrolling, which I don't always like. I don't always
or
like
brain rot.
scrolling because because sometimes I'm like, it's hard because I think when we talk about doom scrolling, I think people forget that like the majority of people I think are doing that to cope. Like that's how they're managing their anxiety. And then it's just hard because the trade-off is then yes, and that's what you do. And like it's harder. But like I was like, I would rather have somebody doom scroll and let that like settle their nervous system than sit in bed like this, like trying to force themselves to fall asleep. So I think those are the things I think that we have to contend with as like therapists, which is like there are coping skills that are effective but aren't always deemed the healthiest. But we have to figure out a way to meet our clients where they're at and figure out what works for them.
Or could they scroll different content that maybe isn't like all the negative things that are happening in the world, right? But maybe it's like cute puppies. Like I have a lot of like Arizona Humane Society, like dog rescues, because I just love like looking at all the cute puppies. So I'm like, okay, like I can scroll puppies all day and they're just cute and I want to bring them all home, but I won't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you guys read the book, The Anxious Generation?
Mm-mm.
That one is it's really good. I think the author's like Jonathan Haidt, or how do I say his last name? But it's essentially about like this generation of children and young adults because they grew up with immediate access to like technology and almost like overconsumption of people's lives that are so like peripheral to what we're used to. And I could make like a TED talk about this topic.
You should.
Because
Let's
I
post it.
should. I don't know if either of you know this, but I like never had social media growing up, and I just like
You
didn't.
still
I
don't,
came out
right?
like no, like
Do
I
you feel like
came
it
out
was
of the womb
helpful?
like 40. Like I never like found a need for it. My parents didn't. It didn't make me not have it. I just didn't like desire to have it, I guess. And so in college, in undergrad, me and a couple of the people in my research group did a study for a year tracking people and like the content they looked at before bed and like looking at what that did. And there was like pretty strong findings that what you look at, like doom scrolling before bed, it affects your mood for like 48 hours after and like your view of self. We need to do a podcast on it. Say like for women, because I just don't think
I'm gonna write a note.
I'm gonna write it. I'm gonna write it down. But I don't think we're like meant to have access that much. That's also so filtered, and we're not even getting like the raw view of what people look like or what their lives look like. And I think there's like studies done with teachers too now, like elementary school teachers that are saying like my kids can't sit through standardized tests anymore because their attention span so much smaller.
It is. And then if you throw in like the COVID kids that, were starting school, like elementary school in COVID, I think they have an even harder time because, it's like they were on the computer for a year or whatever. So they didn't get all of that socialization that you normally get, like starting kindergarten, first grade, all of that stuff. And so I would be curious too, to kind of like research like how many of those kids have maybe like a dual diagnosis of like ADHD, anxiety, or ADHD and autism or something else.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to see even now, I mean, 3 years out of it, like, how many of my kiddos still struggle.
Yeah.
Like, they will still talk about, like, the COVID years and, like, how difficult that was and how much it changed them and how much it changed their interactions, and I think a lot of kids, I think, came out of that feeling like, "Is there something wrong with me?"
Yeah.
Right? Which is this I had this huge shift in my life and in my routine, and now I have to kind of figure things out, and so now I'm starting to notice things about myself that I didn't notice before, and so, I mean, I wonder I would like to think that there are people out there, like, doing studies on these kids right now because, like, that was so life-changing for so
Yeah.
many of them.
For sure.
Yeah, and especially, like, the age of which it happened,
Yes.
like, the
Mhm.
correlation with it, where it's like if you fell in the age where you weren't, like, really little, to where it's not a core memory and you weren't, like, resourced enough, like, in later years, that's a significant portion, like, a year and a
Yeah.
half or 2 years, like, moving
Mhm.
from online and doing all of that. I'm gonna be very curious to see, like, what the studies show with it
Yeah.
and their socialization now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, and I think too, the other part of like, I mean, I think post COVID, one of the things that I feel like I saw ramp up, which I think has been one of the most amazing things, is like people's awareness
Yeah.
now of neurodiversity and making changes. Like if you go to like a football stadium here, I don't think Cardinal Stadium here, at the Sun Stadium here, I'll have to look. I think at Gila River they have one, but even at, like, the concert venues and things, like, a lot of these places now have, calming rooms and have neurodiverse rooms
Oh,
and
cool.
sensory rooms for people so that they can take a break because I think
The
I think we get a
overstimulation.
lot of feedback, like, you can do the headphones, you can do all of those things, but sometimes it's not just the noise, sometimes it's the environment, and so one of the conversations I think they had in the NFL is, like, how do we make this situation safer for them and more comfortable so they don't always feel like they have to get up and leave the game because
Mm,
that was the feedback they were getting. Like I got so overstimulated, I just had to leave. And so now they have these environments where people can go and take a break and take a breather and then go back and like watch the game. And so like I love those things. Like Zoo Lights now like has like a neurodiverse day. It has like the low
That's
sensory day.
awesome.
like that.
Do that on Mondays and like 10 years ago, that would have been unheard of, and, like, a kid walking around with headphones on would have been like, "Why is he doing that?" You know, and I feel like it's so
Yeah.
normalized now, which makes my little heart happy because I feel like so many kids and adults, like, didn't know how to navigate these things and didn't have
Yeah.
these outlets, and now I feel like the world is finally catching up and saying, like, "This doesn't mean that something's wrong with you, that you're sitting at a football game where people are screaming and yelling for 4 hours straight." Me, and like, that can be overstimulating. It's
Yeah.
overstimulating for me, and I'm obsessed with football. And there are moments where I, like, walk up in the concourse and there's thousands of people, and I'm like, "I can't do this."
Yeah.
And I will go and get in a corner, and I'm like, "I just need to be away from people for a minute, and just I need to take my break," because that's even overstimulating for me as a person who feels like I can navigate that situation well, because
Yeah.
I do it a lot, but there are days when I'm like, "Mm-mm, I'm not going up there with all those people. I'll sit in my and stay nice here and safe." But the fact that they have those spaces, like,
Mhm.
is the most incredible thing. Some of them I'd like to make bigger, but we'll
Yeah.
get there.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's more talking just about like research and conversations. There is more and more research about neurodiversity and perimenopause in women, where there's a
Mhm.
lot more research on perimenopause just in general, but there are more and more women getting diagnosed with like ADHD or some sort of neurodiversity as they're in perimenopause. And some of those resources, whether it's like hormonal changes or things like that, they just don't have the same capability to manage all of it. So I've had probably 3 women recently just get diagnosed with ADHD and perimenopause.
Full-time job being a woman.
It is. So it will be interesting. I will be curious if we're tracking like research on spectrum disorders, if we're tracking research on
Mhm.
like the access to like social media and the internet and all those things. Also perimenopause and those changes too. What,
Mhm.
research will say in like 5, 10 years.
Do you guys have any couples where like one person's neurodiverse and the other isn't.
Yeah, maybe not with autism, but with like OCD or trauma, ADHD. I get a lot of
Mhm.
couples where like one partner has ADHD.
Mhm.
So, what about you, Chantal?
I think the one that I think of right now is probably OCD. Yeah. And that is definitely like a point of contention in their relationship is navigating like, how do I respect this thing that feels like so important to them while
Yeah.
still, yeah, like managing how we can feel like connected in a way.
Do you get this statement, Chantal? Because I feel like one of the statements I get a lot, which is the hardest thing I think for me to manage, is the non neurodiverse person in the relationship often says to me, well, do I just have to accept all of this and like not get some of my needs met because they're unable or like it will be more difficult for them to manage that? And
Yeah.
like every time I hear that, a little piece of my heart breaks because I think that for a lot of those couples, they're like the person is like, that's my best to do that. But I always try to have those conversations. And I think those are the conversations I feel like we're navigating now. And trying to do a better job of like, how do we like work within those relationships to say, like, yes, this person may struggle with this, but just because something's harder for them to do doesn't mean that they're not capable of doing it. And
Hmm.
Yeah.
that's the other conversation that I have with, like, the neurodiverse person who's like, "I can't do it," or like, "It's too hard." Like, in life, we have to do hard things, and, like, working on your relationships is difficult,
Right.
and so I always say, like, doing the hard thing is much better when you have someone who's willing to support you.
Yeah.
So, try to navigate that conversation that way, but I think that's a common theme, and it makes my heart sad. People feel like they're like, "Well, what do I do?" Like, because I can't change that. It's something you can't change in someone.
Well, and I think I have a couple thoughts. If it were like a physical disability and very visible, like there would be a little bit more empathy for it. But I think when it's, a mental health diagnosis that isn't always visible, it's harder for the partner, the neurotypical partner, to have maybe like empathy or
Mhm.
understanding of what the neurodiverse partner is going through.
Mm.
And I think EFT is really great for that. So emotionally focused therapy to talk about, okay, so when your partner doesn't do this, or they do it this way, what message does that send to you? How are you interpreting that? And sometimes having that interaction in a couples therapy session kind of like lights a fire under maybe like the neurodiverse partner to make some of those changes, even though they're hard, or vice versa, where then the neurotypical person has a little bit more empathy for the difficulties or the challenges that the neurodiverse partner is going through to like show up and do what's needed.
Yeah. Yep. That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. And sometimes I feel like we probably all do this, but, explaining to the neurotypical partner, here's how this shows up. Here's how their brain is operating differently than a neurotypical brain, and almost like breaking it down, going
Yep.
back to that initial definition, Darcy, that you gave when we started today.
Yep. And having them explain, like, this is how I'm experiencing this, you know? And so you have those like I have a couple, and I think one person, if we're talking about like if I have a couple and like one person might be on the spectrum, one person might be ADHD, like you're both neurodiverse, but the way you experience life
Yeah.
is very, very different, right? And so we have to have a lot of conversations about like if somebody's ADHD and they can have conversation and I want to attack it and like I want to deal with it immediately. And then my person on the spectrum is like, I need a minute, like to process my thoughts.
Yeah.
Like we have to talk about like what does that compromise look like? Because we have to be able to get both of your needs met. But like that person that's on the spectrum has to understand like why it's so important that this person process that information. And this person that's ADHD has to understand like why my person on the spectrum like needs a minute to kind of collect your thoughts before they can respond because they're not going to respond instantaneously like they may.
Yeah. Well, and even in neurotypical couples, right? We see that pattern a lot too of like, I think with the neurodiversity, it's kind of adding an extra layer of what's happening in their nervous system, what messages is it maybe reinforcing? Like if it's something like I'm a problem or I'm this, it's like, okay, let's dissect that a little bit more. And again,
Mhm.
have more conversations about it.
And I think like the psychoeducation that comes from that, like thinking about a couple couples that I'm seeing, or even like what you both are saying, I actually think when there's a dynamic of either one or two that have are neurodiverse,
Yeah.
I think there's actually a lot of opportunity to like reframe it and give them an opportunity of you guys can have really direct conversations about how you're processing the world and what you
Yeah.
need out of communication with the other in a way that might actually give them more tools to be effective in communication or getting closer and like understanding each other's inner world than potentially a neurotypical couple that is okay kind of in the status quo and like letting things be siloed. So like a misconception of there might be people might be thinking whether it's one neurotypical and one neurodiverse of like, well, how can we overcome this?
Yeah.
Or is my partner, like Darcy, what you said, is it always going to be something that I have to like concede to? And I think like the right reframe allows them to do a lot of work that, again, couples that maybe wouldn't think to go to therapy just wouldn't get access to.
Yeah.
Agreed. 100% agree with that.
Yeah. And Darcy, you do neurodiverse evaluations, assessments for adults. So you do like autism evaluation. If I'm
Well, I
using
do
wrong
ADOS.
language.
Yeah, so I do an ADOS screening, which is like, so an ADOS screening, so the difference between like an ADOS screening and like a full scale eval, so I don't do full scale evals because you have to have
I misspoke. I apologize.
It's okay. It's okay. I pray one day that that changes, but we'll see what happens. But like, I think Manon can agree with me on this. Like in doing my ADOS screenings, I would say that I don't know if I've done one at the private practice is nope, they've all been adults. And the common theme that I get is that, in my personal opinion, I think a full scale eval is really important if you're dealing with a child, especially like, right, the younger you can get a kid evaluated and get them interventions, the better off they are.
Yeah.
But when I have someone who's 35 coming in and they're like, I might be on the spectrum, they don't necessarily need a full scale eval because they don't necessarily need access to all of the resources and
Yeah.
connections to like DD
Or
things.
even like
And so-
IEPs in schools, things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And so like we can do an ADOS screening, which is they use an ADOS in schools, and like that's what they used to screen for autism, and that's how kids get their services. So even kids in school don't have to do it, but it's the gold standard. And like what I have is like when I do an ADOS screening and then a client gets a classification of autism, like they tend to just have this relief and they're like, okay, now that makes sense to me. Like I don't need a formal diagnosis. This helps me understand. They use that to kind of guide
Yeah.
like what their therapy is going to look like in the future. So I absolutely, I mean, it was terrifying to do them at first because it's a lot of work, but I love doing them. Like having the conversation. One of the things I think I figured out in Manon, and I actually had this conversation after I did my first one, was one of the things that I picked on was to focus on when I'm in the assessment, like what are the positive things that I see? And like, so then in my conversation after the ADOS and after I have the report written, I tend to meet with the client again and kind of go over all the information. And I try very hard to highlight those positives and like this is the stuff that I saw that was really cool and really great. And like how do we build on that stuff? Because I feel like a lot of the times when you're doing an assessment, it's so deficit focused
Yeah.
that you're like these are all the things that I did wrong. And so I try very hard to like put a positive spin even in the report to say, but these are all the amazing things that I saw because oftentimes I feel like that stuff goes unnoticed.
Yeah.
So I do that. I do ADHD assessments, like anxiety, like
OCD, anxiety. Yeah. So if anybody's like listening or watching this and people are like, oh my gosh, I relate so much. Darcy can do the assessments. I can link her information and like the comments and all that stuff so people have it. But I do think that those are really helpful. And I've sent a few clients to you where I'm like, hey, can you kind of nail down what the diagnosis is in this neurodiverse kind of like lens? And I think it's been really helpful just to kind of guide treatment of, especially for women, where it's like, is it ADHD? Is it something else? Is it anxiety? Is it trauma? And having that official kind of like, here's what the screening shows helps me as a therapist then guide treatment or talk about neurodiversity in that specific way. So,
Yeah.
and I think you have done a really good job, Darcy, of like when you tell people like, yes, you have autism, of being able to say like, you've always been this way. This doesn't change who you are. And so being able to kind of frame it in a way of like, this isn't new information. It's maybe a new label or a new diagnosis, but it's been how you've always been. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And I just tell them like this should help you understand things more.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think as humans, we're always looking for a reason something is the way that it is, you know? And so it's really difficult when you don't have a reason. And so that's what I think I have found has been really helpful. And I think the other thing, like, I think even like my last client that I did an ADOS on, like, one of the things that he has said is like, figure this out. Like, I always thought something was going on. And then he was like, "My mom was really disappointed," and was like, "I don't think that
Oh,
you do," right? But then, like, I think I saw him a couple weeks ago, and he had spent some time with his mom, and he was like, "No, I think my mom's on the spectrum." And so you tend to see those kind of things come out too,
yeah.
where people are like, now I'm noticing this, like, in my parents or like in other people around me that have been in my family. And then when like they tell people, like if they tell people in their family, they'll just like, "Oh yeah, I always thought you were kind of like something was going on, but I just was like, whatever, like no
Yeah.
big deal." And so I think those kind of things are very comforting for clients to hear afterwards too, because I think one of the things he said was like, he goes, I think someone said something to him. He told one of his friends, and his friend's like, "Yeah, I thought you were a little quirky." And he goes, "Well, why didn't you say anything to me?" He goes, "Well, why does it matter?" He was
Yeah.
like, "You're a good person. Like, we have a great friendship." He was like, "Your little quirks don't bother me and don't hinder our
Aw,
friendship. Like,
that's
why
so
does it
cute.
matter?" He was like, "That was the most thoughtful response I got." So I think that's the other thing. I think people are always paying attention, but like, you're not just walking up and being like, "Oh my gosh, like, are you
Yeah.
on the spectrum?" Like, that's not the
Right.
That would be
conversation.
a rude question to ask. Like that, and like if don't ask if somebody's on the spectrum or a female if they're pregnant. Doesn't matter.
Yes,
Like those are two
exactly.
questions off
Yeah.
limit.
Person. I was like, "Yeah, I don't think you go up to people and say that."
No,
I think it all the time. And I said, and I just keep that to myself. And they're like, "Do you really think that all the time?" I was like, "We're therapists." I said, "We observe human behavior." I said, "So it's hard to turn that part of it off." I said, "It's not hard for me to turn off the part where I want to give you advice. Like that, I turn
for
off all day."
sure.
I
Yeah.
was like, "But I'm always observing human behavior. It's just innate in who I am."
In
Right.
my trauma history. So, yes. Well, I feel like this was a helpful topic today. I'm hoping anybody listening or watching is getting some good information. And again, if people are watching or listening and really relate to this, I would say come in, do an assessment, see if it makes sense. Or if you guys just have questions, like people can always reach out to us too. So,
Yep.
thank you guys for being here today.